Andrew, thanks very much indeed. Hello and welcome from us. And we're going to be continuing the discussion you've been having about the impact of Jo Cox's death and considering which way the capital will go in the EU referendum. With me to do that, the Mayor of London, Sadiq, supporter of the Remain case, here with me this week, and Theresa, Villers, Northern Ireland Secretary and Conservative MP for Chipping Barnet, who is campaigning to leave. Welcome to you both. Can we start off with the issue of security, both of you, with high-profile jobs? What does this incident mean for you now?
Well, it's such a huge tragedy. It's just heartbreaking to think of two young children left without their mother. And what I'm very conscious of in the job that I do, where I often meet victims of attacks and murders and terrorism that took place many years ago, that the pain for them can be just as intense many years on. So my heart goes out to her family, and I think all MPs will be reflecting on what more we can do to make sure that we're as safe as possible, that we do everything we can to keep ourselves secure. But I don't think anyone is going to be pulling back. We're still going to be very much out and about in the community, despite the fact that does come with risks. So
you indicate there perhaps there won't be a rush to new measures or measures that cut MPs off or away from the public?
I don't believe there will be, but it's important, obviously, for us all to reflect on what we can do individually to ensure that we're as secure as possible. And I think we're also aware that whilst we run risks, there are many other public servants, like police officers, like prison officers, for whom risks are sadly even more significant.
Sadiq Khan, personally first, since being elected mayor, have you had to review your own security arrangements anyway?
I'm not allowed to discuss it, but there's been lots of reviews and stuff, and I'm quite clear, though, I want to use public transport, I want to meet ordinary Londoners, I want to be out and about as much as I can, because, I mean, I don't disagree with the word Theresa said, it's part and parcel of being a public servant, to be accessible. It keeps you anchored, it keeps your feet on the ground. It means you're in touch with the voters and those who voted for us, and it's really important. And I think what none of us wants is for that to change as a consequence of Jo's tragic death.
So do you think it won't change then for you?
I think the risk assessment's done all the time. Theresa knows is doing her job in government. What's important, though, is that there is a risk assessment done on a case-by-case basis. And you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. One of the things that I think keeps us anchored is the fact that we speak to our constituents, we speak to Londoners, we speak to other people, they can approach us, and that's important.
Some have already raised the issue, though, about whether police were in the process of, or should have been in the process of, reviewing and assessing MP security anyway. Obviously, in your role, with a supervisory role and the close connection you have with the Metropolitan Police, have you had discussions with Bernard Hogan-Howe, the Commissioner, since what happened, about any further actions that are needed making MPs safer?
My understanding is that the police are speaking to all MPs to make sure that there's a risk assessment undertaken, that they're reassured. But it's not just us, it's our staff as well. It's important that our staff are safe. We've got a duty of care to our staff when it comes to surgeries, when it comes to deterring bad people doing bad things, and also making sure our staff feel safe to work in the environment of working for a politician.
Have you spoken to the Commissioner about this specific issue?
We've been in touch about the incident since Jo's death, yeah.
And is there anything that they are doing directly as a result of it?
There are lots of things the police are doing, and there are lots of things that the palace authorities are doing, but you'll appreciate that at this stage things are pretty fluid, and I wouldn't want to inadvertently disclose stuff on the media before it's been discussed with individual MPs.
But it might be fair for MPs and anyone watching to assume that MPs are going to be having conversations with police officers in the next few days or whatever.
And by the way, MPs don't need to wait for the police to contact them if they've got concerns. They should speak to the police, they should speak to the palace authority, they should make sure they feel safe in order to discharge their duty, but also their staff and family feel safe as well.
One thing from you, Theresa, if I can at this stage, is a good question of tone. Is there too much hatred? Has there been too much hatred in the public discourse recently?
Well, I think it's a concern that, particularly on social media, you can see people use the cloak of anonymity to say really, really poisonous and unpleasant and aggressive things about political figures. And I think this is a reminder that, you know, the vast majority of people who go into public office do so for the best of motives. People fully acknowledge that. In the case of Jo Cox, she believed in what she was doing. She was doing it for the good of society, and I think the vast majority of MPs do it for the same reason.
Is there too much hatred? Is there too much poison? Isn't it? People have to make the arguments robustly, don't they?
Can I say the vast majority of the British public are decent, law-abiding, they're lovely. and we must be tested. It's right that you hold us to account. We love debating, dare I say, arguing. It's the tone that is important, and I am concerned that in the recent weeks and months, the tone is one where it encourages an environment of hatred. There's a poisonous atmosphere, and I worry if that could inadvertently lead to people, being encouraged or incited to behave in a hateful way.
Let's just turn to Europe now, just very briefly, because we'll come on to the detail in a moment. But what clinches it for the Remain side in the days that are remaining? I
think I'm a firm believer as a former lawyer in looking at the evidence and looking at what the expert advice is. And as far as I'm concerned, over the next 2, 3, 4 days, my job and those of us who want us to remain in the European Union is to remind voters of the evidence and what the experts say. Remaining means jobs, trade, investment, lower prices. Leaving is a leap in the dark.
Theresa, very briefly.
For me, at the heart of this is democracy. I don't think it's healthy that, as a member of the EU, whoever you vote for at a general election, there are many things that you just cannot change. I think by far the safer option is to vote to take back democratic control over making our own laws in our own country again.
OK, well, let's look at it in more detail. Which way will London vote? Last week we reported from Havering, you may remember, on the outskirts of the capital, reputed to be one of the most Eurosceptic places in the land. This week we've gone to Lambeth, where the instinct to remain is at its strongest. Andrew Cryan is in Brixton with more details now. Andrew.
Yeah, that's right, Tim. What this all comes down to is a piece of research by the polling company YouGov. They asked 80,000 people around the country, that's a really big number, their views on the European Union. Now, they found that the strongest views for out were in the London borough of Havering, which you say we were in last week. Well, this week we're at the other end of the scale in the London borough of Lambeth. We're at the Ritzy Cinema in Brixton, right in the heart of the borough. Now, that research says here they want to stay in more than anywhere else in England. We've been here all week trying to answer one very simple question. Why?
For the last few weeks, the polls have been sailing this way and that, but there has been one near constant. Whatever the headline national figure, London shows up as wanting to remain in the European Union.
If the polls are to be believed, that support is particularly concentrated in a certain type of London borough, which is near the middle of the city, relatively affluent but very diverse. So it's places like Camden, Islington, Hackney, Southwark and so on. But according to one bit of research, there's one London borough which is more pro-Remain than anywhere else in England. And that is Lambeth.
In the heart of the borough is Brixton, sometimes said to be the symbolic centre of Black Britain. When Nelson Mandela and Muhammad Ali visited, this is where they came. So, in 2016, will it also become the beating heart of pro-European sentiment?
Now, we've been walking around Brixton Market for about an hour. We've met a couple of ins, a couple of outs, a lot of people who didn't want to be filmed, some who didn't know there was a referendum on, some who don't vote, and some who didn't understand the question. It's pretty fair to say that election fever is yet to grip Brixton Market.
My view is Remain.
You want to stay?
Yeah, stay.
And why? How come?
Because it's good.
Are you swayed by the arguments on either side, or...?
I haven't listened to anything.
Really?
To be honest.
Really? Wow, so it's just not bothered you?
If this really is the Remain camp's heartland, it could be in trouble. But luckily for inners, a 15-minute drive up the road in Kennington, we met up with campaigners having a much better time of it.
I mean, I was just on the tube just now, 2 people approached me, they wanted posters, they wanted stickers, that was coming down just now, and nobody ever talks to each other on the tube normally, so that's quite something in London.
Can we have another little watch, please?
So you're not related to these guys, you've just...
No, we're the local Labour Party. We've been campaigning every day in this area. We feel incredibly strongly to put out the Labour Party message that Labour believes Britain is stronger in Europe. And we've done this so many times, we've run out of leaflets. So we just spotted these guys on our way to our latest campaign session, and I thought I'd grab some of theirs.
So who are the people that are so keenly snapping up the Remain camp's flyers? There might be a clue back up the road in Brixton again. Just around the corner from its traditional market is a new arrival, Pop Brixton, a box park full of fresh young businesses, social enterprises, hip things to do and fashionable customers.
you see negative things about the EU? I mean, are you concerned about anything?
Not really, only positive if I'm totally honest, but I'm all for immigration and letting people in who need a place to live.
I really like the idea behind it, the philosophy behind the EU and remaining together and sticking together for the greater good of, I guess, the greater, well...
I think it's quite 50-50 in my mind, but the reasons I'd vote in is probably, I think for our generation, we are kind of European. I just think it kind of makes sense. And if you look at who the people are that are like in the public eye voting out, I'm definitely not down with any of their views normally.
Do you feel proud to be European?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you feel proud to be British?
To a certain extent, yeah.
Where we did find strong support for Remain in Lambeth, again and again it came down to a positive view of migration, diversity and integration with Europe. Next Friday morning, we'll wake up to discover whether enough of the UK feels that way for Britain to remain in the European Union.
Now, I'm joined by Jonathan Bartley, who's a local Green Party politician here in Lambeth, who viewers might see a bit more of in the future. He's standing to be the leader of the party on a joint ticket with their only MP, Caroline Lucas, and is the bookies' favourite to get that job. Jonathan, first question. You know, this research suggests that Lambeth is the place in England that wants to stay in more than anywhere else. Why?
I think there's several reasons. One, it's one of the youngest boroughs, and it's young people's futures that are at stake. The other reason is perhaps the huge diversity, and we're at ease with our diversity in Lambeth. We've had it for years, for generations, and so we don't see migration as a threat. We've got a very densely populated borough, but we get by. But also, we know that the problems that we face are caused by central government cuts. They're caused by a council that doesn't always listen to local people, and they're not caused by the new Polish deli on the high road.
Well, last week we were in Havering and we heard all sorts of reasons that people wanted to leave. They said it was down to the state of the NHS, it was house prices, it was the difficulty of getting a school place for their kids. Now, those are all problems that people have in Lambeth. Why are they not reaching to vote out to solve them?
Well, I mean, there is huge inequality, and that's another thing that marks Lambeth out. It is the most unequal borough in London, but people recognise that that inequality is not down to the lack of money. You know, we're richer than we've ever been. We've got more technological advance than we've ever had before. The problem is that the money's in the wrong hands. And it's not the migrants that are taking the money, it's the huge inequality. Now, there is a move against gentrification in Lambeth. You know, there is a resentment against a lot of rich people coming into the borough, and that needs to be acknowledged. But it's not the migrants that are doing that. It's the wealthy that are holding the money, and the wealth isn't being shared out equally. And so they see, the real root cause of the problem.
I mean, you talk about gentrification and new kind of richer, younger people coming into the borough. In the film, at least, it was in Hot Brixton, it was in amongst that group of young professional people where there seemed to be real support for Remain rather than the traditional Lambeth population.
Well, I love the diversity of Lambeth. That's exactly what you get. You get people living side by side from very different backgrounds, and the fact that we're able to make it work, I think, is a real witness to the fact that we are stronger together in the European Union, and people aren't afraid of that. And I think what's missing here from the debate, but what people in Lambeth get, is that there is a positive case for the European Union to be made. There is a positive vision. Actually, we're looking at the future. We're looking not just at what we would lose by leaving, but what we can gain by staying in. And from my own background in the borough, we have a lot of people with additional needs, a lot of disabled people. They need additional help, they need additional rights, and we're not going to get it here from this government. We're going to get it from the European Union. People recognise that, and people are coming together to work for it.
OK, Jonathan Bartley, thank you very much. Now, Tim, just a final thought, which is talking to people here in Lambeth, you met an awful lot of people who didn't understand why anybody would vote out. And in Havering last week, we met people exactly the same. They had no conception of why anyone would want to stay in the European Union. People hadn't even met people from the other side. So, in fact, although we're just one city, it seems that we are, in fact, in some ways, very polarised.
Andrew, thanks very much indeed. And Theresa Villers, what would you say to convince the people of Brixton and Lambeth over the next 3 days?
Well, I think we face a very bright future outside the European Union. We will regain control over our trade policy, which opens up business opportunities around the world. I'm sure we'll get a great deal from the European Union and carry on doing business with them in just the way we do now. And we will be back in control of our own destiny, able to have democratic control over the people who make our laws. So if they get it wrong, we'll be able to vote them out at a general election, which we cannot do at the moment.
Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, this week out campaigning in Manchester and Leeds. Why have you been needed to go up there to campaign for Remain?
Well, it's not a question of being needed. I think it's in London's interest for our country to remain in the European Union. And I've been speaking to people in Manchester, Leeds, Bradford, Oldham, explaining why it's so important for our country. And look, we're not quitters as a country. Why would we quit the European Union? We joined NATO and the UN in the 1940s. We joined the G7 and the EU in the 1970s. It leads to jobs, it leads to trade, it leads to investment. We are part of a single market of 500 million customers with one set of rules which we help make, which we do half of our trade with. Why would we walk away from that? And why would that club allow us to get the benefits of that club, not pay the fees, not abide by their rules, when people who are members can't get those benefits? Of course they would. We'd have to pay to trade. That'd be bad for jobs.
It is one of the
bad
reasons
for our
why you've
economy.
been out of London, you've been heading up to northern cities or northern areas, because of your concern about how under your leader, Jeremy Corbyn, there has been what people describe as a kind of less than, sparkling campaign to Remain.
Well, I think it's going to be a really close election.
But what do you say about that, though? What do you say about his campaign?
Well, look, Jeremy's been campaigning as well all around the country. He was on the BBC earlier this morning talking through Andrew Marr to the British public. All of us have been campaigning in the Labour Party, and it's really important, with 3 days to go, that people turn out to vote on Thursday to remain in the European Union, because we aren't quitters. There's a proud and patriotic case to stay in the European Union.
But do you have a view about the campaign? You mentioned an appearance on television today, but a lot of it's been town hall meetings. You said last week that you didn't think that had been cutting through. So, what should he have been doing?
Look, I don't criticise the media, but I appreciate it's more exciting Boris versus Cameron and Gove versus Osborne and Farage versus the Tories. I understand that. It's less exciting when you've got Labour politicians talking to voters. We've got 3 days to go now.
So you have, just to make it clear, you have no issues about the way he has been perceived as being less than warm about the Remain case? No. You have no issues?
Well, he's been authentic. He doesn't think the EU, like me, is perfect. I don't think it's perfect either. And he's been explaining the pros and the cons, and on balance, he thinks we should stay in the European Union, and I think he's right, to be honest.
London First, among organisations, several in London, but one that cite the risk to 300,000 jobs. London's kind of financial prominence, Theresa, Villers, a risk you're really prepared to take?
But the reality is that organisations like this said that these would be the consequences of not joining the euro. They were wrong then, and they're wrong now. At the heart of the argument for the Remain case is that somehow this country is too small, too weak, too stupid to run our own affairs. And I think that's absolutely wrong. We've got the greatest financial centre on the planet. We've got some of the best universities. We've got some of the greatest scientists. We're the 5th biggest economy in the world. We invented self-governing democracy and we exported it around the world. There's no reason why we can't go back to running our own affairs in this country.
But you know that all the major organisations and the business organisations, the City Corporation, are warning of the impact of this. And one just very, very fundamental, simple example. People come and headquarter here. They come and set up in London in the financial sector because it passports them. It gives them a way into the single market. You'd be removing that.
Well, there are around 75 banks which passport into London. It's going to be in the EU's interest to do a good trade deal with us because they sell much more to us than we do to them. It's not in their interest to close off the access of their banks into London or to erect trade barriers with us, because that will make it more difficult for them to sell goods and services to us.
Do we have too many EU migrants in the capital?
Well, so I was elected on a commitment to reduce migration to the hundreds of thousands, so I think I will be working to do all I can to meet that manifesto commitment.
Tens of thousands, I think.
To reduce it to the tens of thousands.
An interesting slip.
I think, obviously, migration has delivered tremendous benefits to London. Everyone would accept that. But I think there's also a need for democratic control over migration. I think it's important that we have democratic control over decisions as sensitive as that.
Should there be an upper limit, Sadiq Khan?
No, and we need to manage immigration, and David Cameron's managed to make a good deal with the European Union. But we've got to remember, EU immigrants who come here, they work, They pay taxes and support our public services. 130,000 EU migrants work in the NHS and social care. There are 1.5 million Brits who work for companies owned by EU citizens. And since 2001, I don't want the facts to get in the way, Theresa, £20 billion has been contributed by EU citizens versus benefits they've received.
So you have no concern about the numbers here at this time? It's fine. 670,000, I think the estimate is, that have come between 2004 and 2014?
Of course we have to manage migration, but here's the problem. The Leave campaign can't explain what would happen if we left the EU. If you look at Australia, look at Norway and Switzerland, they have more immigration per head than we have under the current rules here. So my question is,
just to be absolutely clear, sorry, Sophie, are you saying you have no upper limit? You don't think there should be an upper limit? You accept that? You just see what the market provides. Do you have a concern at all about the pressure on services, on schools, the delays at see a GP at the moment, the pressures on health services?
Look, the deal we've got means that no new country can join the European Union without us having a veto to stop them. But also, a new country that joins can't have their citizens come into our country unless we are happy for them to do so, and there's convergence. As far as public services is concerned, let's be honest, the responsibility for there not being enough genuinely affordable homes isn't the immigrants, it's got the politicians. The reason why the NHS has been starved of investment is because of government policy. What we should be doing is making sure that we build enough genuinely affordable homes. We've got to invest in the NHS. It's EU immigrants who support the NHS and social care, who support our schools. And what we should be doing as politicians is addressing people's concerns rather than playing on them.
What do you say to that?
Well, I would reiterate that migration has brought tremendous benefits to London. We're a hugely successful example of a global city with people who have heritage and connections with countries all around the world. But I think it is important that we have the ability to control the numbers coming in from Europe because of the pressure on public services. And it is important that we have confidence in the immigration system.
What about make provision within public services and improve the public services because they are contributing to our tax receipts?
Well, absolutely. We're working to do all we can to deliver more housing, to improve our public services. But it is still the case that significant population growth does create pressure. And that is one of the reasons why we need to take back democratic control over decisions.
And do you think it really suppress the wages of Londoners?
Well, the Bank of England is clear that significant increases in migration depress wages. So that's an impact on Londoners which is being felt today.
It's a very small effect, though, isn't it? I think 1% or something over there.
0.03%.
It's, you may not think it's significant. It may not affect your income, but people on lower incomes, in lower skilled work, it's a significant impact for them. And I think we should bear their interests in mind. There are some people in London who benefit from the European Union, but there are many who are having their wages depressed as a result.
Theresa, Martin Lewis, the money expert, has said if we leave the European Union, it's more likely we'll have less money in your pocket. It's just a fact. Experts and the evidence point to leaving the EU being bad for jobs growth and our economy.
Running out of time. Thank you very much indeed to both of you. Andrew, with that, it's back to you.